Welcome to AHRC TV's weekly roundup. I'm Josephina Bergström. In this week's special program, AHRC TV presents a panel discussion from a folk school meeting held in Hong Kong between 1st and 5th of June. Human rights defenders from several Asian countries joined the week-long conference that centered on failures of justice institutions in the region. Participants included Adilur Rahman Khan from ODHIKAR in Bangladesh, Bushra Khaliq from Women in Struggle for Empowerment in Pakistan, Chitral Perera from Janasansadaya in Sri Lanka, and Nepalese Supreme Court advocate Dipendra. AHRC's Executive Director Bijo moderated the discussion.
Welcome to the AHRC TV. I have a distinguished panel today. I am Bijo, Executive Director of the Asian Human Rights Commission. To my left, we have Mr. Adilur Rahman Khan. He is a veteran human rights defender and a prominent lawyer from Bangladesh. To his left, we have Dipendra. He is from Nepal. He is also a lawyer and has been working extensively in one of the most conflict-hit regions in Nepal, Terai. And to his left, we have Bushra Khaliq. And Bushra is from Pakistan, and she has been the voice of the voiceless in Pakistan, particularly women and children. She has led quite a lot of street as well as people's protest in Pakistan. And towards Bushra's left, we have another veteran, Mr. Chitral Perera. He is from Sri Lanka. He has about 30 years of experience in human rights work from Sri Lanka, has organized a lot of people's struggles, worked extensively on various issues in Sri Lanka. So welcome to you all. And for today's discussion, I wish to focus on the issue of custodial torture, which is very closely related to police reforms in our region, which is South Asia. Now, every year, June 26th is marked and observed and celebrated also as the International Day in support of the victims of torture. But over and over, what we have seen is rallies and meetings and speeches which are all given demanding the end of torture, or to put an end to torture, to have a law against torture, and so on and so forth. But I wish that I could pick on your experience to take it one step further, to seek your opinion and your expertise to understand torture, or how far you agree and how far it has the currency to see torture essentially as a justice problem, a justice institution problem. So this is the area in which we will focus our discuss today. So let me start with Adil. So how do you view as this question, the question regarding torture, as to what extent it affects the entire concept of justice, the entire process of justice in Bangladesh?
Thank you, Bijo. The culture of impunity is deep-rooted in Bangladesh. The torture is endemic. In the police stations, you see that the poor people are taken there, they are tortured for some money, to extract some money from their family members. I am not talking about the high-profile political cases or the cases of trade union activists who are tortured. I am talking about the ordinary people who are taken to the police stations, beaten up there, and when their family members, poor family members, bring some money, they are sent for some ordinary cases or they are released. This is happening for years together, for very long time. It's there in the society, and whenever there was a kind of protest, there have been kind of angry expression from the society. Unfortunately, this happened very much localized manner, not a national kind of protest or campaign. In the judiciary, the magistrates, they send people happily for remand. Remand means torture in Bangladesh. So they don't see, they don't check that how the person is when he is produced before the magistrate, or how the person physically is when he or she is produced before the magistrate, and whether there is a need to send this person for treatment. It's not done. That's why whenever somebody is detained, somebody is sent for remand, it's taken that this person will be tortured. So the family runs from door to door how to protect this person of the family. So it happens. Now one very serious thing is happening, that is whenever police is detaining some political activist, shooting at the leg, so that eventually this person is becoming maimed and the family is suffering. These are the ordinary political activists, not political leaders or somebody who was perceived as a political activist, but ordinary person. So ordinary people are suffering. We have this anti-torture law which was initiated by Asian Human Rights Commission from 2013 end. But now the police has come up with the idea of having indemnity, so that the people who are tortured in custody, even if they file a case against that in any court, because usually police station will not register that, that can be a kind of condoned. So that's why this is a very serious situation, and the fight is kind of tough and it's uphill work.
Thank you, Adil. You have touched two very important aspects. One, of course, is that torture is not just an act and a problem that for which the police and the law enforcement agencies alone is not responsible. Whereas on the other, having a law against torture, irrespective of the effort that has been put behind drafting and having eventually a law against torture, criminalizing torture in Bangladesh, it still has not yielded any result, or it has not even caused any change. Whereas on the other hand, the perpetrators who are to be subjected by the law is now claiming immunity from the law. Now I want to proceed on the same line towards Bushra. Now, as opposed to Bangladesh, in Pakistan you have an additional challenge as well. And if I may put it, it's a country in the last 64-68 years of independence, where a democratic set of government has only made, if I may say so, cameo appearances. This is the period where you have a government which is in power after a democratic process or a voting process. Otherwise, it has been overturned and largely it was under military rule. And the presence of military in daily life in Pakistan must have made, I assume, life even difficult when it comes to excessive use of force, exploitation at various levels. Now, Adil was referring to torture being used as an instrument for extortion of money rather than the common perception that it is used as a tool for obtaining confession. So when it comes to the question of military, it makes the issue more complex, because military often claims immunity from the civilian justice process. So what is your experience that you would want to bring in, or what do you think that the role the military has played to make things more complicated, if I'm not wrong, in Pakistan?
Yes, thank you, Bijo. Your analysis is perfectly all right, because if we see that since the inception of the country, half of its age was ruled by the military dictatorship, and whenever the civilian governments comes, they cannot enjoy the whole power, or they cannot evolve the those pathways where the democratization or the process of democracy get stronger. So in this way, like presently we have civilian government, but what is happening, the military establishment has been claiming that this war on terror, this is the big monster where we have to control it, and for this they have they are putting a lot of national resources for the combating terrorism in Pakistan, though we know that from the beginning where it came from, and originally who nurtured those those grounds and the terrorist forces over there. So military has played a role at that point also, and afterwards it's like more than 30 years that the whole nation is paying the price of that that character that military has played on that, nurturing, forming those groups, and afterwards in the name of, on the context of combating terrorism in the country, our nation has paid a big price for that. Even during the civilian governments, what is happening? They are coming up with the ideas that we have done the targeted operation in this area, on that area, and the results are coming. It's not the civilian government which has the potential or the strategy to control those forces. So this is it's our responsibility, and it's our, you know, we can take care of it. So the political solution is not workable here. So the military operation is the final resort to deal with this phenomena of the terrorism. So they are not only the putting all the big chunk of the national resources into that war, but also they are forcing the very elected political forums, our assemblies, to legislate those laws where they can take more, you know, space for their legitimacy, for their space for the putting resources on the context of combating the terrorism, as well as they have established army courts, and they have established the now they have more powers through the laws which is called Pakistan Protection Act, and also they pushed and forced the all political parties to legislate that the armed forces, they have more powers, they have more space to deal with the civilians, criminals also. It's a very complex phenomena, like the rule of law or the law and order situation in the country. It's a complex phenomena, but even then our forces have always take up that pathway and strategize where the civilians are heavily under threats. And now the spaces for the human rights work, now the spaces for the human rights defenders and the voices of the human rights defenders are systematically, you know, being crushed, and the spaces have been reduced under because of the kind of legislation, and there is a new law which is will be very shortly passed by the assemblies, and we know who are behind this legislation business. This is not the parliament who is willing to do all these business, but these are the other forces who push them to go for those legislations which curtail the basic and fundamental rights of the people, where the voices of the people for the human rights violations in Balochistan, they will be targeted, and elimination is the final solution for them.
Thank you, Bushra. We will come back to these questions a little later. Dipendra, you are from a country which has been under a kind of a dictatorship for a long period of time. Now, if we were to bring it back to the question of torture, your country is one of the first countries in Asia to have a legislation, despite all its defects and pitfalls and shortfalls. Still, it was one of the first countries which has accepted in principle that torture is not an ordinary crime, whereas it has to be dealt with separately, and at least from the point of compensation, it has made a civil claim. I mean, a civil claim was possible. Still, lot of cases of torture are being reported. There is this large issue of impunity of military as well as police officers still looming large in Nepal. There are questions of resources concerning facilities for the government to run in Nepal. You have been working in one of the most challenging circumstances in Nepal. So, where do you find this issue getting currency for debate in the Nepali context? There is a large extent, the large presence of international civil society, including specialized arms of the United Nations working in Nepal very closely with the government. But what kind of challenges do you face when you work closely with legislators, when you work closely with policymakers in Kathmandu and across Nepal, when you try to argue with them that torture is just not a legislation issue, it is just not a policing issue, it is more of a justice institution problem?
Thank you, Bijo. I think you have rightly pointed the problems we have, particularly in post-conflict period. And I would like to remind you that around 20,000 people died in conflict for 10 years in Nepal, and no mechanism has been set up to address or investigate those cases and take action against, particularly against Nepal Army and against the Maoist fighters. Yes, the government has formed two commissions, Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Disappearance Commission, but still there are a lot of faults and flaws within the acts. So, there is a quite resistance from the victims group that the mechanism set up in Nepal would not address impunity at all. So, that is the first condition we have. And second, when we look like the regular policing, regular criminal justice process, torture is a big problem in our context. Yes, you have mentioned that Nepal is the first country in Asia that at least has recognized torture and has separate legislation. But we have, when you go at the substantive level, what is the result of that act? It's really difficult to find any substantive result, because what we have been seeing that because of the act which we call Torture Compensation Act, torture is just accepted and defined as civil offense, not as a criminal offense. So, for the civil there is a compensation, but when you go in the compensation process, particularly in the judiciary, then the amount of compensation that is awarded to the victims, it is like a 2,000, 3,000 Nepalese rupees, and after 2 years and 3 years. So, like a victim feel highly frustrated to go in that process. That is the first condition. Second, the judges, most of the cases, even the last 2 weeks, and Asian Human Rights Commission has highlighted that case a lot, Kalu Chaudhary case from Kailali districts. And in that case also, like just 2 weeks back, the judge forced us to go in the mediation process. And we said, no, it's a criminal case, you can't force us to go in the mediation process. So, you can see that the first performance in the judiciary, the judges are to go in the mediation process by taking some money, forget it. So, that is the approach we have in judiciary. Even in the police, if you go, if you see that, yes, torture is like a slapping 1 or 2 slap or beating with a stick 1 times, it is, people are not going to complain about that. But when there are severe, like a kind of torture in the detention, the people used to complain to us, and when we go in the judicial process, it is really difficult to win the cases. So, despite having a legislation at the substantive level, I am sorry to say that even we do not have a single case to give you example, the best examples. So, that is the problem we have at the substantive level, and hopefully, and because of that, what we have done, we have lobbied strongly to have legislation to act that criminalize torture, not as a civil offense, but criminal offense.
Thank you, Dipendra. Now I want to pick on you, Chitral. You have seen it all. Your country was at war, which is now hopefully over. Your country has a law which criminalizes torture. You have fought so many cases in court, lost most of them, won a few. You have worked actively with local groups. You have rallied people on the subject into the streets of Colombo and in Sri Lanka. You have worked closely with parliamentarians. You have worked very closely with the bureaucracy. You have trained human rights defenders, lawyers, doctors. You work very closely with forensic surgeons. You have made so many publications which deals with the question of torture. You have worked very closely with victims of torture. Now we have three of our distinguished panelists speaking about the challenges that they have faced. And the issue that we are mooting today is to find the challenges when people like you on the ground try to work on the issue of torture as more of a justice problem, more of the question that challenges the foundations of justice, not just something that can be treated by way of a law or by a simple police reform, but a larger democratic reform. So, what is your take on this subject?
I don't know, most of the people know, even Sri Lanka doesn't know, that torture is abolished by the British rule in 1815 in the convention signed by the Sri Lankan rulers that time. And after that, in our penal code, torture is illegal, is an offense. In 1970, our constitution, the present constitution, the torture is a fundamental right, freedom from torture. And anybody who was tortured by a executive or a administrative, they can go to the Supreme Court for to fight against it. Then in 1994 we have this Torture Act. So all the laws are there. The problem with why not few, if you go, we have collected 150 Supreme Court judgments against torture.
150.
150. In our to knowledge, it may be more. In some cases, they have awarded about 20 lakhs. And their judgments clearly says the problem is with the lower judiciary and with the other related departments like doctors, the lawyers who appear in the lower courts. In police torture, the first remedy you can take from the magistrate, the lowest court. The magistrates are colliding with the police. They are always with they are what you call helping each other. The lawyers are depending on the low cost lawyers. Almost all lawyers are depending on the police. So they never brought the case to the magistrate. Then in our law, before a person were produced before a magistrate, the person should be produced before a government doctor. So most of these peripheral doctors are with the police, working with the police. So they issue that nothing has happened to this person. So that is the point we are facing now. The magistrate sometimes they never see a person before they ordered for remand. So these are the problem. This problem will go from even when the Torture Act comes, there are several convictions against the policeman. After some time, the judicial action was turned other way. The Supreme Court doesn't want to hear these torture cases. This happened in the last regime. If you can analyze the trend of Supreme Court, how from 1986, the judges were very concerned about torture victims. Within 1 year to 2 years, they will finish the case. Now, it's more than 10 years, 15 years. Supreme Court, they don't want to hear the torture cases. They just postpone. To contribute, the judges doesn't want to hear the defending lawyers. They use all sort of tactics to postpone the case and bringing pressure to the victim. So these are the things. Even in the magistrate courts, the cases will go on. If the person was tortured, the judge allowed them to fabricate more and more cases. One case, if the person coming in front of the court and said, I was tortured, the next day the police will file about 10-15 cases against him. So the judges allowed them, and it's carry on. This is the most problem with the judiciary, because judiciary in Sri Lanka, in every aspect, judges are corrupt. The prosecutor is in Sri Lanka, we call them Attorney General's Department, the State Council, they are corrupt. I am not like to mention about the lawyers. Lawyers are, they are 99% corrupt. So this is the problem we are now facing. To eradicate this torture, you have to challenge the judicial system in Sri Lanka.
The use of torture is just not the use of force by the state agencies, which is largely the police or the military at their will, but it is also allowed to be continued without any form of control, so that those who have authority, those who have power, could rule by enforcing fear upon the population. And in the process, the police also make use of it for various other forms of their conveniences, which, by the way, includes obtaining confession, extracting bribe, and so on and so forth. So in essence, the question that we were discussing is proven by the context in our countries, that the practice or the way by which the state or the government allows police to be the way the police is in our countries is a planned action, that the government can by this control opposition, by this control voices of dissent, and by this control the population. So when it comes to the question of torture, while I agree, I guess you all agree to the fact that it is just not enough that we have a law against torture. It is much more. It is to be seen in a much more larger paradigm, where the question also touches upon the foundations of what is considered as democracy, what is considered as equity, what is considered as equality. So I think this year's International Day in support of victims of torture would send this message, would emphasize this message back to the society, that torture is just not a tool for obtaining confession. It is more of a control tool used by governments in Asia and beyond, where they use brute force and create fear to maintain their control. So it essentially is a question of justice. It is just not a simple issue of police reforms. Thank you very much.
That is all from this week's Roundup. For more on these and other issues, please log on to www.humanrights.asia. Thank you for watching, and see you again next week.